Okay, ready to get a handle on this whole DevOps thing? I mean, everyone's talking about it, but it can feel kind of like, well, a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, all the jargon can make your head spin.
Exactly. Luckily, we found this really cool article on Scrum Master.
Oh, nice.
It breaks down DevOps in a way that, well, even I can understand.
That's saying something.
Uh-huh, right. But seriously, what's interesting is the author's a Scrum Master.
Ah, so they're coming at it from a more practical, people-focused angle.
Yeah. Instead of getting lost in all the technical stuff, they focus on like the underlying principles and the cultural shifts.
Which, let's be honest, are often the hardest part.
Totally. So before we even get into the details, can we just like define DevOps? I feel like everyone has a different definition.
Right. It's one of those buzzwords that gets thrown around a lot.
And it can get confusing.
Definitely. Well, the article doesn't give a super short definition, but it does reference AWS's take on it, which is basically that DevOps is a combination of like philosophies and practices and tools that help organizations deliver products faster and, better.
So speed and efficiency are key.
Yeah, think of it like a well-oiled machine where everyone's working together smoothly.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. But the article really stresses that it's not just about the tools, right?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, you can have the fanciest project management software in the world, but if your team's constant fighting, that's not DevOps.
Exactly. It's like saying agile is just about using sticky notes.
Exactly. It's about the mindset, the culture, the way people work together.
So it's like you need the right ingredients and the right recipe.
Perfect analogy. And speaking of ingredients, the article talks about the 3 ways of DevOps.
3 ways?
Yeah, think of them as like the core principles.
Okay.
They are flow, feedback, and continuous learning and experimentation.
Okay, break those down for me.
All right. So flow is all about making sure work moves smoothly from one stage to the next, like a relay race where everyone's in sync.
So like no more silos, no more tossing things over the wall and hoping for the best.
Exactly. It's about breaking down those barriers and creating a seamless process.
Gotcha. What about feedback?
Feedback is all about closing the loop,
Meaning?
like constantly checking in with everyone involved, including the customer, to make sure you're on the right track.
So it's not just about delivering something and then forgetting about it.
Nope. It's about continuous improvement, making adjustments based on feedback, and learning as you go.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about this third way, continuous learning and experimentation? What's that all about?
Well, picture feedback as a continuous loop, right? And within that loop, you have continuous learning and experimentation. It's about fostering a culture where people are encouraged to try new things, experiment, learn from their mistakes, and just constantly improve.
So it's like embracing failure as a learning opportunity.
Exactly. It's about creating a safe space to experiment and innovate.
Okay, so these 3 ways, flow, feedback, and continuous learning, those are like the foundation of DevOps.
Yeah, they're the guiding principles that make everything else work.
Okay, but how do you actually put these principles into practice? Like, what does that look like in the real world?
That's where things get really interesting. The article goes into specific cultural practices that support each of the 3 ways.
Oh, cool. So like tangible things teams can start doing.
Exactly. Want to dive into those?
Yeah, let's do it. Starting with flow. How do you actually create flow in, say, a marketing campaign?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
In a traditional setup, you might have like marketing doing their thing, development building the website, and customer service prepping for inquiries.
Yep, all in their separate silos.
Exactly. Flow is about breaking down those walls and making sure everything moves smoothly from one stage to the next.
Okay, so like a relay race.
Yeah, where everyone's passing the baton seamlessly.
Ah, so it's about collaboration, communication, making sure everyone's on the same page from start to finish.
You got it.
No more of those it worked fine on my computer moments when it hits the real world.
Ah, exactly. And that actually brings us to feedback, which is all about closing that loop.
Closing the loop, how?
It's like having a constant conversation between everyone involved, including the customer,
Right.
to ensure you're always on the right track, making adjustments as needed.
So it's not just about delivering something and then washing your hands of it.
No way. It's about constantly checking in, getting feedback, and making sure you're meeting everyone's needs.
Okay, I'm seeing how this all ties together.
Yeah.
And then within that feedback loop, we have continuous learning and experimentation.
Exactly. It's like you're always looking for ways to improve, to do things better, to learn from your mistakes.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about constantly evolving.
You got it. And that's really the heart of DevOps.
Okay, this is starting to make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how do you actually put these principles into practice? Like, are there specific things teams can do to create more flow, get better feedback, and foster that culture of continuous learning?
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to dive into next. The article outlines some really practical cultural practices that support each of the three ways.
Sounds good. Take it away.
All right, let's start with flow. One of the key practices is limiting work in progress.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Well, imagine your desk is piled high with projects.
Ugh, I could barely picture that.
Right. You're stressed, things are slipping through the cracks, nothing's getting done efficiently.
I feel that.
So limiting work in progress is about focusing on completing tasks before starting new ones, just like clearing your desk one item at a time.
Ah, so it's about prioritizing and creating that clear path for work to flow through.
Precisely. And it's closely linked to reducing batch sizes.
Batch sizes.
Yeah. Instead of trying to launch a massive update all at once, you break it down into smaller, more manageable chunks. Think of it like packing a suitcase. You wouldn't try to cram everything in at once, right? You'd pack it bit by bit.
Makes sense. So smaller batches, faster delivery, more frequent feedback.
Now you're getting it. And that ties back to that continuous loop we talked about.
Right. Okay, so limiting work in progress, reducing batch sizes. What else?
Another crucial practice for flow is reducing handoffs.
Handoffs.
Yeah, like when one team passes work off to another team. And this is where DevOps zooms out from, say, the individual team level, like in Scrum, to encompass the entire workflow.
So it's not just about collaboration within a team, but also between different teams, like marketing, development, and operations.
Exactly. Fewer handoffs mean fewer chances for things to get lost in translation or for delays to crop up.
It's like streamlining the whole process from idea to implementation.
Bingo. So we've got limiting work in progress, reducing batch sizes, and minimizing handoffs. Those are some key ingredients for smooth flow.
Okay, I'm following you. But what happens when things inevitably get stuck? Like when there's a bottleneck in the process?
Great question. That's where identifying and removing bottlenecks comes in.
And what exactly is a bottleneck in this context?
Think of a traffic jam. Everyone's stuck. Nothing's moving. It's frustrating.
Yeah, that fun.
In a workflow, a bottleneck could be anything that slows down the overall process. Maybe it's a step that requires approval from, multiple people.
Oh, I've seen that happen.
Or maybe it's a task that only one person knows how to do.
Right.
So it's about finding those choke points and figuring out how to either eliminate them or make them more efficient.
So it's like constantly looking for ways to optimize the flow, to remove any obstacles that are slowing things down.
Exactly. And this ties into another important concept. Eliminating waste.
Waste, like literal garbage.
Not quite. The article defines waste as anything that the customer doesn't need or isn't willing to pay for.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
It challenges teams to think critically about every step in the process and ask, does this truly add value?
Right. Or is it just fluff?
Exactly. Is it adding unnecessary complexity or cost or time?
That's a great point. It's not just about being efficient for efficiency's sake.
Nope.
It's about delivering real value to the customer.
Exactly. And making sure you're not wasting time, energy, or resources on things that don't matter.
Okay, so we've covered some key cultural practices for flow. What about feedback? How do you create a culture where people feel comfortable giving and receiving feedback, especially when it comes to identifying problems?
Well, you know that meme that goes around, it worked fine in DevOps problem now?
Oh, yeah, I've definitely seen that one.
It perfectly captures the old way of thinking where developers would just toss something over the wall to operations and say, hey, it worked for me.
Yeah. Not exactly a recipe for success.
Right. So one of the core principles of DevOps is this idea of shared responsibility for quality.
Shared responsibility.
It's not just the developer's job or the operations team's job.
It's everyone's job.
Exactly.
So breaking down those silos and creating a sense of collective ownership.
Yep.
But how do you actually make that happen, especially when people are, afraid to speak up for fear of being blamed?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's where we'll pick up next time.
Okay, I'm hooked. Can't wait to dive into that.
So, where were we? Yes, that million-dollar question. How do you get people to actually own quality? Especially when they're afraid to, admit they messed up.
Yeah, it's easy to say shared responsibility, but creating that environment takes work.
Totally. It's not going to happen overnight.
So where do you even begin?
Well, the article talks a lot about psychological safety.
Okay, what's that?
Basically, It's about creating a culture where people feel safe to speak up, share their concerns, admit mistakes, without fear of being punished or ridiculed.
Yeah, I can see how that's important.
Right. If you're constantly worried about getting in trouble for making a mistake, you're less likely to, point it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're going to want to hide it under the rug.
Which just makes things worse in the long run.
Totally.
Yeah.
So how do you actually build psychological safety? Like, what does that look like in practice?
It starts with leadership, really.
Yeah.
If managers are constantly, pointing fingers and assigning blame, people are going to clam up.
Makes sense.
Instead, leaders need to encourage transparency, celebrate learning from failures, and create a culture where it's okay to say, I don't know, or I messed up.
So it's about shifting from a blame culture to a learning culture.
Exactly. It's about focusing on solutions, not scapegoats.
I like that.
Yeah.
But what about those situations where things do go wrong and you need to solve a problem quickly? Like, how does DevOps handle that?
Well, the article mentions this technique called swarming.
Swarming, like bees.
Kind of. Think of it like a team huddle on steroids.
Okay.
Instead of everyone trying to solve the problem in isolation, you bring everyone together, developers, operations, even people from other departments, to brainstorm solutions.
So it's about leveraging the collective knowledge of the group.
Yep. 2 heads are better than 1 and all that.
Right. And I bet it helps build that sense of shared responsibility, too, if everyone's involved in solving the problem.
Absolutely. The author actually shares a great story about a team they worked with.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They would immediately swarm on any issue that came up, no matter how small. They'd gather around a whiteboard, throw out ideas, and just work collaboratively until they found a solution.
That's cool. I love that visual.
Right. It's about that whole team spirit, everyone working together towards a common goal.
Okay, so swarming is a good tactic for problem solving. But what about preventing problems in the first place? Like, is there anything in DevOps that addresses that?
Well, the article talks about the importance of prioritizing non-functional requirements.
Non-functional requirements. Remind me what those are again?
So functional requirements are the features that users directly interact with, like the ability to add items to a shopping cart or send a message.
Right, the stuff you actually see and use?
Exactly. Non-functional requirements are all the things that make the system work smoothly behind the scenes.
Okay.
Things like security, performance, scalability.
Gotcha. So it's like the foundation of a house.
Perfect analogy. You might not see it, but it's essential for everything else to function properly.
Right. And in the past, non-functional requirements were often treated as an afterthought, right?
Yeah, they'd get squeezed in at the last minute, which led to a lot of technical debt and headaches down the road.
It's like saying, we'll worry about the plumbing and electrical wiring after we've built the whole house.
Exactly. DevOps is about shifting that mindset and prioritizing these crucial elements from the get-go.
So building a solid foundation that can support future growth and innovation.
Precisely. You got to think long-term, not just short-term gains.
Okay, so we've covered flow and feedback and some of those cultural practices that support them. Let's move on to the third way, continuous learning and experimentation.
All right. This one's all about fostering a growth mindset, encouraging experimentation, and really embracing failure as a learning opportunity.
Okay, I like the sound of that. But how do you create that kind of culture where people actually feel comfortable taking risks and, potentially failing?
Yeah, it's definitely a shift in mindset.
For sure. Because we're often taught to avoid mistakes at all costs.
Right. But in DevOps, mistakes are seen as valuable learning opportunities. And again, it starts with leadership.
Oh.
Managers need to create a safe space for experimentation, encourage their teams to try new things, and celebrate both successes and failures.
So it's about reframing failure as a stepping stone to success.
Exactly. And not just like saying it, but actually living it.
Right. Walking the walk.
Yep. The article talks about institutionalizing the improvement of daily work.
Like, what does that mean?
It's about building continuous improvement into the DNA of the organization.
So it's not just a one-time thing or like an afterthought.
Nope. It's got to be baked into the culture.
So it's not just about having a yearly retrospective or a post-mortem after a major project.
Right. It's about constantly looking for ways to improve, even in the smallest tasks.
So it's like having a built-in feedback loop for everything you do.
You got it. And that ties into the concept of reserving time for improvement.
Okay, so instead of just reacting to problems as they arise...
You're proactively looking for ways to prevent them in the first place.
Got it. Shifting from a firefighting mentality to a prevention-focused approach.
Exactly. It's about being proactive, not reactive.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those situations where people do make mistakes? You can't just ignore those, right?
Of course not. But the article says to never punish people for mistakes.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, they even suggest elevating those who make mistakes.
Wait, what? Elevating them? Why would you do that?
Because making mistakes often indicates that someone is taking risks, pushing boundaries, trying new things, and those are the qualities that drive innovation and progress.
Interesting. So it's about recognizing that failure is a natural part of the learning process.
Exactly. And that we should be encouraging people to step outside their comfort zones.
So creating a culture where people feel safe to fail forward.
Exactly. You learn from your mistakes and come back stronger.
Okay, I'm digging this. So what's the last cultural practice the article talks about?
Transforming local knowledge into global improvements.
Transforming local knowledge. What does that mean?
It's about recognizing that knowledge and expertise often reside in the minds of individuals, right?
Okay.
Maybe someone on your team has a brilliant way of troubleshooting a particular issue, or they've discovered a shortcut that saves everyone time.
Right. I've seen that happen.
But that knowledge often stays siloed within that one person.
Yeah, it becomes like their little secret weapon.
Exactly. So transforming local knowledge is about creating systems and processes that allow people to easily capture and share their knowledge.
Okay, so it's about making sure that valuable information doesn't get lost.
Yep. Whether it's through a company wiki or a shared document repository or just regular knowledge sharing sessions.
So it's about creating a collective knowledge base that everyone can benefit from.
Exactly. It's about democratizing knowledge.
I like that. So we've covered a lot of ground here, talking about the cultural side of DevOps.
Yeah, we've gone pretty deep.
But I'm also curious about the technical side of things. I'll admit, it can feel a bit intimidating for someone like me who's not, a tech expert.
I get it. The technical side can seem like a whole other language.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how does the article approach the technical aspects without, getting too bogged down in the details?
Well, it assures us that you don't need a computer science degree to understand the basics.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Instead of diving into complex code or jargon, it focuses on explaining what the key terms mean.
Okay.
And how they contribute to the 3 ways of DevOps flow, feedback, and continuous learning.
So it's more about the concepts than the nitty-gritty technical detail.
Exactly. It uses clear language and relatable examples to make these concepts accessible to anyone.
Okay, that sounds much less intimidating. Can you give me a taste of some of these technical practices?
Absolutely. Let's start with deployment pipelines.
Deployment pipelines.
Yeah. Imagine you're building a house, and instead of having to wait for each stage to be completely finished before moving on to the next,
Okay.
you have a system where the foundation, the framing, the plumbing, the electrical, it can all happen simultaneously, with each stage feeding smoothly into the next.
So it's like an assembly line for software.
Exactly. It automates the process of moving code from the developer's computer to the production environment, where it actually gets used by customers.
Right.
Which reduces errors, speeds up delivery, and allows for more frequent releases.
Okay, that makes sense. What about automated testing? I hear that term thrown around a lot.
Yeah, automated testing is like having a robot inspector that checks every nook and cranny of your software for potential problems.
Interesting.
It's a way to ensure that your code is working as intended without having to manually test every single scenario.
So it saves a ton of time and effort.
Exactly. And it catches errors early on, which is always a good thing.
Right, because fixing bugs later in the process is always way more expensive and time-consuming.
Exactly. Another cool technical practice is feature toggles.
Feature toggles, what are those?
Think of them like light switches for your software.
Okay.
You can deploy a new feature to production, but keep it switched off until it's fully tested and ready for prime time.
So it's like a safety net?
Yep. If the new feature causes problems, you can just flip the switch and turn it off without having to roll back the entire release.
Okay, I like that. It minimizes risk and allows for more experimentation.
Exactly. Then there's blue-green deployment, which is a technique for reducing downtime and risk during deployments.
Blue-green deployment. I'm picturing something involving paint, but I suspect that's not quite it.
Nope. Imagine you have 2 identical production environments running side by side, like 2 identical stages.
Right.
One is live, serving users, while the other is inactive.
Right.
When you have a new release ready, you deploy it to the inactive environment, test it thoroughly, and then simply flip the switch and route all traffic to the updated version.
So you're basically switching between 2 identical environments seamlessly.
Yep. It minimizes disruption to users and allows for a quick rollback if any issues arise.
Okay, that's pretty slick. These technical practices are starting to make a lot more sense now.
Good, I'm glad. What else? Oh, the article also touches on telemetry and dashboards.
Telemetry and dashboards.
Yeah, they're basically tools for monitoring the health and performance of your system.
So it's like having a real-time view of how things are running.
Exactly. You can see things like CPU usage, memory consumption, network traffic, all that good stuff.
And that helps you spot potential problems before they become major issues.
Precisely. It's like having a dashboard in your car that tells you your speed, fuel level, engine temperature, and any warning lights that might pop up.
Right, right. Okay, what about those collaborative practices we see in Agile, like pair programming and code reviews? Do those play a role in DevOps too?
Absolutely. The article touches on those as well.
Cool.
Pair programming is where two developers work together on the same code, which can help catch errors, improve code quality, and foster knowledge sharing.
Right, two heads are better than one.
Exactly. And code reviews are a more formal process where other developers review your code before it's merged into the main code base, again with the goal of catching errors and improving quality.
So it's about having multiple sets of eyes on the code and leveraging the collective wisdom of the team.
You got it. And finally, the article mentions blameless postmortems, which we talked about earlier in the context of cultural practices.
Right. Those are those meetings where you dissect what went wrong after an incident without pointing fingers or assigning blame.
From a technical perspective, blameless postmortems often involve analyzing logs, metrics, and code to understand the root cause of an issue and identify ways to prevent it from happening again.
So it's a combination of technical analysis and cultural openness.
Precisely. And it highlights how the cultural and technical aspects of DevOps are really intertwined and mutually reinforcing.
This has been incredibly enlightening. I really appreciate how the article and your explanations have managed to demystify DevOps and make it accessible to someone like me,
Right.
who's not, a tech expert.
Glad to hear it. It's really not as complicated as it sometimes seems.
No, it's just, there's a lot to it.
It's true. It's a pretty big topic.
But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your overall takeaway from this deep dive.
Okay.
What's the most important thing you think our listeners should understand about DevOps?
I think the key takeaway is that DevOps is more than just a set of tools or practices.
Okay.
It's really about creating a culture of collaboration, continuous improvement, and putting the customer first.
I like that.
It's about breaking down silos, embracing experimentation, and recognizing that the journey of learning and improvement never really ends.
Yeah, it's a continuous process.
Exactly. It's a mindset, a way of working, a way of thinking.
Now, what's fascinating to me is how much overlap there is with Agile and Scrum.
Right.
Our listener has probably already encountered many of these principles in their work, even if they haven't formally implemented DevOps.
Absolutely. Things like limiting work in progress, reducing batch sizes, prioritizing non-functional requirements. These are all core tenets of Agile methodologies.
So it's not necessarily about adopting a whole new way of working, but rather about enhancing and extending the principles they're already familiar with.
Exactly. It's about taking a more holistic view of the software development lifecycle, from ideation to delivery and beyond, and fostering a culture of continuous learning and improvement.
I love that perspective. So for our listener who is, eager to apply these insights, what's one concrete step they can take to start incorporating DevOps principles into their work, even if they aren't in a technical role?
That's a great question. I would encourage them to, reflect on the cultural practices we discussed and identify one or two that really resonate with them.
Okay.
Maybe it's starting to prioritize non-functional requirements in their projects, or maybe it's advocating for a more blameless approach to problem solving within their team.
Right.
The key is to start small, experiment, and iterate, just like in Agile.
Great suggestions. It's about taking those first steps and seeing how these principles can make a positive impact on their work and their team.
And the cool thing is, once you start seeing those positive results, it creates a ripple effect.
So it's spread throughout the organization.
Exactly. People start to see the benefits of this way of working, and they're more likely to adopt it themselves.
It's like a virtuous cycle.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of continuous improvement, one step at a time.
This has been an awesome deep dive into the world of DevOps. We've demystified the jargon, explored the core principles, and even touched on some of those technical practices.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
But most importantly, I think we've highlighted how DevOps is ultimately about fostering that culture of collaboration, continuous improvement, and customer centricity.
And that's something we can all strive for, regardless of our role or industry.
Absolutely. So for you listening right now, what aspects of the DevOps culture could you start implementing in your own team or organization? Even if you're not in a technical role, think about it.
Yeah. What small change could you make today that could have a big impact down the road?
This has been a fantastic deep dive, and I want to thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
It's really about those small steps.
Yeah.
They can lead to some pretty big changes.
Yeah, totally. You don't have to, overhaul your entire system overnight.
Exactly. DevOps is a journey, not a destination.
Well said. It's about constantly learning, adapting, evolving.
So true. So for you listening right now, what aspects of that DevOps culture, what could you start implementing in your own team or organization, even if you're not, in a technical role?
Yeah, what could you try? Even something small.
Imagine if everyone on your team felt empowered to, speak up about problems, share their ideas, and experiment without, that fear of failure.
Oh man, think of the creativity, the productivity, the job satisfaction.
This has been an awesome deep dive into, the world of DevOps.
Yeah, it's been fun.
We've demystified some of that jargon, explored the core principles, and even touched on some of the technical practices.
A lot to take in, for sure.
But most importantly, I think we've highlighted how DevOps is really about fostering a culture of collaboration, continuous improvement, and putting the customer first.
Couldn't have done it better myself.
And that's something we can all strive for, no matter what we do or where we work.
Absolutely. So until next time, keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep pushing those boundaries.
Love it. And remember, the journey of continuous improvement, it never really ends.
Nope. There's always something new to discover.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you.